Hello, Charlie TCG here, and welcome back to Looking Ahead, the series where I break down and analyse the meta, what's happening over in Japan, and how that'll impact Taiwan. Today, we're talking about Roaring Moon. It absolutely dominated over there in Japan. It's on its final week of the E block rotation before we get into F, which is happening very, very excitedly on Friday. The brand new set means a brand new format and a constantly brand new rotation. So I'm very, very excited to talk about a little bit about what I think some of the top archetypes might potentially be. We're going to look at the breakdown of exactly where the meta share kind of went in the last City League. Kind of see exactly if you've got regionals coming up or even a League Cup or a League Challenge. This might give you a little bit more perspective about where Japan kind of thought about the last weekend, but where they think the meta is slowly evolving on their final week of this format. We're guys also looking at some brand new cards as well, the finalizing of that new temporal set, which I'm very, very excited about to talk about some of these really interesting archetypes. Thank you so much for support on the channel so far, and without further ado, let's jump into these new cards. So we see here we have Torterra EX, the final EX of to be revealed from the set, and honestly, it's pretty good. It definitely works a lot well with the Brilliant Stars Torterra, the one that does 50 times round of old Pokemon you have in play, the Grottle that lets you search out for grass Pokemon. This one here is a little bit good inclusion to have for it. For a grass energy, 30 times the amount of grass Pokemon you have in play. This may not seem a lot, but with a whole bunch of grass Pokemon, you're doing 180 damage for one energy. Now, Charlie, you're going, well, that's not going to KO a ton of things, but it does KO Charizard for one energy if you have a full bench. If not, well, it kind of is a bit meh card, but it's a fun inclusion to have in your Torterra decks. The last A-Spec got revealed, Maximum Belt, does 50 more damage to your opponent's active Pokemon EX. Now, again, this is not the strongest card, but honestly, in the decks like Charizard and the likes of Giratina, this could be a really good A-Spec of choice. Why is it good in Giratina? Well, you don't need to use Star Requiem to KO a Charizard. You can use a Lost Impact, lost impact, yeah, to do 330 damage, which is really, really powerful. So you can use potentially two of these and a Star Requiem to KO 3 Charizards in a game. Very, very exciting. It's good in Charizard, so you can do 230 damage very, very early on, KOing all these big basic EXs and Vs. So honestly, it could be a good inclusion. Bramble Gas, I really like it for its ability. For each prize card your opponent's taken, it gets 50 more HP. The opponent's taken 5 prizes, gets initial 250 HP. Being 350 HP single prize Pokemon, that's a pretty scary thing to deal with. Having Fire Weakness, though, is pretty bad right now with how good Charizard is and potentially the likes of Gouging Fire and Entei in the future, but it's attack 80 times 80 for each and flip a coin for each energy attached for this Pokemon is pretty good, but we are losing Cherim, but we do have Fortress EX, so in theory, you can use Fortress EXs, knock it out, load loads of energy on his Bramble Gas, have really high HP, and try and get these big one-hit KOs. A fun archetype as well. Drillbat I really like for its ability. When you play this card from your hand to the bench, you may search your deck for 3 basic fighting Pokemon energies and discard them and shuffle your deck afterwards. This works really well for synergy of Miraidon. Reason why that's really powerful, because of Miraidon, you need to have that basic fighting energies in the discard pile to attach them to your basic your fighting Pokemon you have in play. Also works well with Raging Bolt to deal a load more damage, get the energies in the discard pile to fill with Sada, Shanty Socks. So honestly, this Dropper might have some legs in these sort of archetypes as well. Might see Miraidon and Raging Bolt actually kind of tick to be quite competitive and have this sort of a mapping out of the prizes. We also have some really fun little cards here. This P-Dove as well, which is really powerful, which once you return, if this Pokemon's range HP is 30 or less, you may search your deck for an Unpheasant or Unpheasant EX, which is very interesting. They do mention Unpheasant EX, so there might potentially be one, and predict this Pokemon and evolve into it. Now, why is this powerful? Well, you can instantly get into it straight away. You have the likes of Gapejaw Bog, or potentially the Stadium card, which allows you, when you attach an energy, to put 2 damage counters on them as well, so you can easily evolve into its Unpheasant. This one here, Reversal Wind 70, and then put 2 energy and cards from your opponent's active Pokemon into the hand. Pretty powerful, a fun little effect, especially if you're going first, which is really quite scary. And Boundless Power, 180 damage, and next turn this Pokemon can't attack. This potentially we've got to keep in back of our mind because we need to see the rest of these Unpheasant cards if we do get an Unpheasant EX. Kind of go back to this Pidove because it could be really powerful. Having a rare candy as an ability, and this can be done as early as putting it into play, definitely something to be considerate about. Bronzong is very interesting, especially for that Evolution Jammer attack. 30 damage, and your opponent can't play any evolving cards from their hand to evolve in their next turn. This is pretty good. Stopping likes of some Charizard, stopping likes of Excalibur, Gardevoir, and any sort of evolving cards is very powerful. But we do have TM Evolution, which can easily evolve into it. That's searching from the deck. or even that new supporter card, which I'm going to talk about very shortly. There are ways to cheat around this sort of attack, but having this as a lock card as well, 1 energy on a stage 1, definitely something to consider. Similarly, like Rillabeam. Rillabeam 30 damage and defending active Pokemon if it's knocked out during their next turn, your next turn, take 2 more prize cards. So it's kind of like if you attack into that defending active Pokemon, if it stays in the active spot, you can take additional 2 more prize cards. That could be like 5 prizes if you have knockout of VMAX, or just usually potentially 3 if it's a single prize Pokemon. Pretty powerful, pretty good, but there are lots of switching outs. People can just move out from the active spot, and then all of a sudden this effect becomes redundant. Definitely something to consider, or even for GLC. And finally, let's look at some brand new trainer cards. Dangerous Jungle, I was weirdly very happy to be released. You might remind you a lot of Verbank City Gym. During your opponent's during Pokemon checkup, put 2 damage counters on each poison Pokemon, except Dark. I really like that effect, kind of like going with that poison Pokemon can't be poisoned. Why I think this is very powerful, when all of a sudden with Radiant Sneasler and Dangerous Jungle, you're all of a sudden going to do 50 damage for poison, including the additional 1 which you already put into it. That's very, very powerful. During checkup times going from your turn back to your turn, that's 100 damage being placed on the opponent's active Pokemon if they can't retreat. This instantly makes me think that Walking Wade could actually have some legs. Doing 240 damage already if they have poison, that 150 for that poison damage counter on it. Radiant Sneasler to get into 270, and now finding the Stadium card doing 290 damage, going back 330, that KO Charizard. Well, unfortunately doesn't KO Charizard because of the Dangerous Jungle doesn't affect on it, but you see what I mean with it. It's very, very powerful, racking up this poison damage very, very quickly. I like this one. I think now, I'm saying this out now, having that poison thing, maybe Walking Away hasn't got any legs at Forge Spider because it isn't going to KO Charizards, because the Stadium card makes that kind of like redundant. But in general, very, very powerful. A lot of people are thinking return of Seismitoad EX, because we've got Brute Bonnet, we have Dangerous Jungle, and this supporter card, which I'm going to jump right into it. Search your deck for a Pokemon, except for a Pokemon with an ability that evolves from one of your bench Pokemon, one of your Pokemon in play, and put that Pokemon in the evolving, then shuffle your deck. You can play this card on the Pokemon that was put into play, or set up, or during the turn it was put into play. So honestly, this is very, very powerful. A lot of people are thinking teaming up with Banette EX. Banette EX is the item lock Pokemon for Psychic Energy, 30 damage, and also the opponent can't play any item cards. You could put a Brute Barnet with the booster Capture Energy, have the Dangerous Jungle, have the Radiant Sneasler. You're dealing potentially going to be nearly 100 damage when it goes back into your turn, and having the opponent having item lock generally could be quite scary. This card here has definitely got a ton of potential, but we've got to kind of like wait to see how it works, because a lot of our Pokemon have abilities, but this here is very, very strong still. Full Metal Lab, I know I skipped over it, but it basically means your metal Pokemon take 30 less damage from the attacks from the opponent's Pokemon. We've seen this effect a ton of times in metal decks. It always have that reducing damage effect. Having a Stadium card is fun to see. Metal support could work with that Metang that got revealed a couple of weeks ago. Honestly, pretty okay. And Morty's Conviction, pretty much you can only discard this card if you discard another card from your only play this card if you discard another card from your hand, and pretty much draw a card for each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. This works very, very well in the lights of basically Zinnia's Resolve, but only 1 discard instead of 2. Pretty okay overall. Honestly, I'm pretty happy with these new cards. There's a lot of new combinations as well. I think Dangerous Jungle really opens up a lot of things for poison types. And Stravio, or however that's pronounced, Stravio too, I think could be really, really strong in these decks. Like, to get these evolving things working effective, could we see the return of item lock? So without further ado, let's look at the meta share. This is what people have kind of come into it. Kind of like looking about where the City League Championships meta results are kind of like going in that way. We can see here at the end of the day, Charizard came out on top being 18.7%. Charizard has been on absolute tear in Japan recently. It's pretty much been one of the top archetypes for about nearly the whole, like, since it's been revealed, especially since the Paradox Rift format. Giratina kind of like flip-flops between it, but 13.9%. Gardevoir just under 10% by 9.9. I think that's a very, very good percentage. I think Gardevoir is super, super powerful. Miraidon as well, sneaking in at 8.8. Lost Box as well, kind of definitely focusing on the lights, having the Roaring Moon being at 7.9%. I think that's very good. Followed shortly by Roaring Moon. It had absolute resurgence, hence why the title of this one. It took Japan's meta by storm, and I was surprised about it as well. How powerful it is. A lot of people recognize how good Calamity Storm is, as well as Frenching Gauching. It's such a strong attack, and one of the best sort of attack in the game right now. Mew actually finishing off very strong at 5.7%. It's very weird to see that this is a deck which has been released for nearly 3 years, but it has never really left that top position. It is always up there, being at been one of the strongest decks right there in the format. Golden Go is having that like resurgence as well, especially since Kyoto Champions League by being 5.5%, and Rapid Strike being at that 3.5%, and Shein Power ending up at 3%. What I think is so interesting about this meta, how it's kind of evolving the Power Up format. Shein Power's labeled BDIF. Heck, I even believed it was going to be BDIF with the likes of Iron Hands, but it was so finicky at times, so much it had to like work for it. It definitely kind of like fell off a little bit, but still always been very, very popular, being at 3%. In fact, it only got a couple top 8s and a few top 4 positions. It didn't actually perform as well as possible. Mew still, I think, did incredibly well. And I think it's a very, very strong deck. It's nice to see it actually did get some recognition before it finally rotates, which a lot of people are either happy or very sad about it. Sorry if you can hear my little cat in the background, he's a little bit chirpy and wants to play. And the rest of the archetype as well is pretty good. I really like how the meta is evolving here. If we just look at the results as well here, we can see Charizard ended up the E block on top at number 1 with 11 wins, 11 second places, 12 top 4s, and 47 top 8s. This is an absolute dominating archetype. I'm really interested to see how Charizard really didn't gain anything from Paradox with metagame, but it just worked so well in that format. By having the Pidgeot EX, by not really having Path to Peak, Charizard could really swoop into it. I have seen a resurgence of Arctina. We haven't seen it really in the regional sort of level, but in city leagues, I noticed a couple Arctinas were winning. A couple Arctinas were really dominated as well. Still, Lost Tina is the more dominant way to play by having 6 wins and 10 second places. But Arctina, I think, has a lot of legs, especially in this metagame. Gardevoir being in second place with 9 wins is pretty good, but the rest of it is a little bit low from where we're seeing Gardevoir. We even saw in our regionals in Charlotte, it didn't have the meta potential a lot of people thought. It was one of the lowest we've seen Gardevoir in quite a while. Are people scared to play it because we have very, very powerful dark type Pokemon, which are pretty dominant right now? Is this going to be a little bit of falling off of Gardevoir? And it does lose quite a lot of things going into the post-rotation. So we're interested to see where it might potentially fall in. Rory Moon jumped back into the format. It's brand new. It hasn't been in, I feel like, all year and multiple sort of months. It's fun to see it kind of have that resurgence. It did really, really well. It got the bracket of day 1 and day 2 in Charlotte. And right now, seeing it get 4th position with 6 wins and not really the lost box version, which has been a lot more dominant in Japan. That's quite nice to see. Miraidon is back in there, doing pretty okay overall, and finish off with Mew, kind of falling down by 1 place. It's been in that 5th, 6th place for about a couple of weeks now, so kind of seen it finish not as strong as we've seen it before, but seen it still actually have that good resistance, good sort of placement as well. It's still going to be in people's records. I think this is definitely something to be considered about if you're going to regionals or a League Cup. These are the top 6 decks, which a lot of people in Japan really wanted to play before we got to rotation. Is that a sign that these are the best decks to really play right now in the format? Right now, before we get to post-rotation, that's kind of like to tell we have a couple regionals, couple specials, and a ton of caps. So I'm really excited to see about how the meta is going to evolve. So let's look at some of these lists as well. This is a very common Rory Moon list. I think Moltres has become definitely a stay. It works really well being your Forest Seal Stone sort of target. It works really well for getting the energies attached to it to work well with Energy Switch. I just think this deck here, Rory Moon, is a super, super powerful. We've seen it with like sort of Greninja or sometimes Iron Hands. Greninja definitely is the more common sort of build as well. Having that water energy, I really like 3 because if you have a spare water energy, you can attach that to Rory Moon. But also, if you prize 1, you don't want to be reliant on 2. If you play 2 and you prize 1, Radiant Greninja also doesn't become an option, so I like having that accessibility. We are kind of seeing a lot of people kind of stray away from just playing Pokestop. We are seeing them go to Town Store because they play a ton of tool cards. The Ancient Boots to capture energy to give it extra HP is very good. Vitality Band to do 230 damage, which is very, very key. And that Forest Hill Stone. Pretty much use the Stadium card to search your deck for a tool card to search your deck for any card you might potentially need. Going back to the boss's orders and not relying on cross switch, I think is very, very strong. Going into the new metagame, I think having the likes of the Prime Catcher would really work well in this archetype. I'm really excited to see how people are kind of evolving their decks and changing them as the weeks sort of progress in post-rotation. As we look at Miraidon as well here, this has definitely become a little bit more of a common build. We are seeing a lot of people kind of stray away from the Path to Peak engine, going back to the Beach Core and the Pioneer to really like search your deck for any sort of cards you might need in the early game. What I like about this deck is it kind of thinks a lot bit more about the late game. EXP share plus Fluffy, I think, really helps for Miraidon. It doesn't really have that late game sort of plan because in the early you want to be explosive, use all your electric generators, flood your board of energies, use Pioneer to get any card you might potentially need. But you could really run out of resources very easily. I think this list really capitalizes on working on a good late game strategy by having likes of Fluffy, by having the likes of EXP share, that you kind of like don't fall back into that in the late game. I also think Luminion can really help, but I want to get any of your supporters you might potentially need. Lost Tina here, I think, is a very good sort of archetype. Hasn't really changed a ton. All this one is really like worked on is it pretty much is going back to the four Jeshenji. We saw Lost Tina win back-to-back regionals in Japan. It's doing an absolute tear right now. I think going back to four Giratina Vs, make sure you can kind of like use your Abyss Seeking very much early on in the game. We've seen the strategy work time and time again by kind of like going the slow approach. You can kind of go that in the Charizard match because they might go and try and KO one of your basic Pokemon, but they can't one-hit KO Giratina Vs very much early on until you've taken two prizes. So going that slow approach can really help you rack up to potentially turn 2, turn 3, easily get into that Star Requiem and Lost Impact damage option. I really like this deck. I think it's very, very strong poise. Doesn't really lose anything. If we look here, it loses Battlefield P-Pass, which you can change to Buddy Poffin, and Escape Rope. And obviously, Path to Peak. Escape Rope can just change into switching cards. And then Path to Peak, the Stadium card is yet to be revealed about what should be the best one for Lost Tina. Gardevoir as well. We're seeing the Gardevoir completely change going into the next rotation by saying goodbye to the Mirage Curlier, the Zacian V, and obviously Gardevoir Shine Arcana. The deck is going to change a ton. What I'm really excited about is how Gardevoir is going to adapt and evolve. It's constantly been up there, been one of the strongest decks for such a long time. I'm really excited to see how it kind of is going to progress going into new format. It's changed a ton and we're going to see it. But honestly, it's going to keep up because it's super, super strong, super consistent, and still has that amazing draw factor in the likes of Curlier. Charizard as well. We have seen this as kind of like be the prime version of why Charizard is super, super strong. The pitch shot as well to kind of search deck for any cards you might potentially have as well. And also having a really good a stadium lineup, I feel like here. Going back to the Lost City is kind of a good sort of strategy for Charizard. This can work really well in Storm matchup, which is a very, very bad matchup. So potentially that may not be the strongest one. But in a deck where you can just get rid of potentially a Sableye or even next like Iron Hands or anything like that, which could potentially kind of like bite you in the butt, as they say, in the late game. It's a very, very powerful sort of stadium card to play. The TM Devolution, I think, has become a must-stay as well. So you can kind of like de-evolve multiple of your opponents at Pokemon in play to really try and help you in that strategy. The rest of the deck, I think, is very, very strong and very, very powerful. I'm really excited to see about how the meta is going to evolve. Mew obviously is doing very, very well, and kind of seeing the second place list is pretty good. We've seen it keeping up with the rest of the metagame. It's kind of like really nice to see it kind of like keep up with that sort of sense. Being that fusion build as well, it kind of like a nice hurrah, the strongest sort of version. People still scared of Spiritomb and obviously Drapion as well, but kind of like saying that last hurrah as well, getting the second place is, I really like this one because I had TM Devolution, which I think is a really fun inclusion from you. Don't really need to rely on that power tablets to constantly get these big one-hit KOs because you can just swoop in with this in the last sort of game, and really get that win in the early game, in the late game. So what I want to do now is kind of like look at someone's predictive thing on PokeCA book about where they think the metagame is slowly going to evolve in the post-rotation metagame. They are thinking that tier 1 decks will be Charizard, Xianpao, and Roaring Moon. They're A tier, they're tier 2 of archetypes, be Goldingo, Lost Box, Raging Bolt, Future Box, Miraidon, and then also the B tier, like the fun of archetypes as well. Their thing is going to be Gardevoir, Lost Tina, Arc Tina, Lugia, and the Donphan Mill. So this is obviously a very much they're looking ahead. They're kind of like understanding about where the metagame could be placed. I do agree with Roy Moon and Charizard. I think they are very, very strong. They lose very, very limited cards as well. Similar thing could be said about Xianpao, but I think having the evolution lock sort of coming around with that and Devolution TM might potentially play it a lot more because if Charizard is going to be the BDIF, that's a deck which I think could be a little bit more considered. Goldingo has surprised a lot of people by doing very, very well as well. It doesn't lose a ton of stuff. But if we look down at the bottom sort of thing here, we can see Lugia is definitely kind of fallen off. Thinking about this time last year where it was the most dominant deck pretty much ever printed, kind of like see it kind of disappear completely. It's definitely an interesting sort of fact as well. Gardevoir's got to kind of like pick up a lot. Going back to Screamtails and Drifloon to your big one-hit KO damage, it's going to work, but definitely something to be considerate about. Lost Tina as well, maybe it's having no Path to Peak, could see a little bit of not as powerful as it once was. Future Box, I'm really, really excited about it. Similar thing as a Raging Bolt. So I'm really excited about where this format is going to evolve. I hope you guys like it. A little bit of a snapshot as well. And I can't wait to talk about it next week, but where I think the metagame is going to evolve and kind of seeing exactly how Japan is kind of playing out post-rotation. So looking ahead, how will rotation shake up the meta? As we just saw, people do think that Giratina and Gardevoir might potentially fall down and not be as powerful as they once was, which I do potentially agree with. Can a new deck keep up? Can Gouging Fire, Raging Bolt, Future Box, heck, even Waking Wade or Walking Wade could actually keep up to be a very, very strong archetype in this brand new format? And could there be a new BTIF? Could Charizard still stay there and not really get dethroned? Potentially, I think Charizard is doing very, very well, is very, very well poised in the metagame. So I'm really excited to be able to see where the meta is going to evolve. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this little snapshot of what some of the brand new cards are and getting excited about post rotation and kind of like seeing the last hurrah to the E block format before we get to F block, which I'm very, very excited and can't wait to start covering next week. I actually have another video happening this week as well, as it's kind of been confirmed that we are going to be having what post rotation right now within Japan. We're pretty much going to have all of those cards in our Temple Forces set. So I'm going to look at some brand new sort of archetypes as well, kind of giving my theories about it, looking at Gouging Fire, which I'm very, very excited about, potentially could be a better way to play Entei Iron Valium. So without further ado, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment down below what deck are you excited to say goodbye to on rotation. My name is TCG, and I'll see you guys later. Bye for now.